Good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Just Fish Outdoors. I'm your host, Dale York, and I designed Just Fish Outdoors to focus on freshwater lakes and streams and to provide information, tips, and techniques, along with how-to segments for catching everything from crappie to catfish. We will also provide tips on equipment, tackle, boating, and much, much more. All of this is aimed at helping you catch more fish and have fun doing it. So join us each week as we talk about my favorite subject, fishing. Hi, folks. Dale York, Just Fish Outdoors. Hey, we are going to continue our fall crappie series. We had Barry Morrow on the show last week, and he provided us some excellent fall crappie tips, and we're going to continue with that series. And I put together some more crappie tips, as well as kind of expounding on some of the things that Barry said last week. So let's get into some more fall crappie tips. You know, when the leaf colors start changing, the days start getting shorter, and there's just a slight nip in the air. These factors really signal the crappie to start their feeding activity. You know, when fall arrives, crappie change gears out of their summer patterns and really start feeding voraciously on shad in preparation for those falling water temperatures and colder temps. They're really trying to put on mass, they're trying to put on body fat to get them through that wintertime period. You know, the fish migrate from deep summer patterns to the shallow areas, the shallow flats, and they're following the bait fish, as we talked about last week. You know, they're not going to be very far from that buffet, so they're following those bait fish before returning to their deep water haunts, you know, later in the year. Anglers who pattern fish as they transition from deep to shallow water and later from shallow to deep water will find hungry fish that will readily strike a lure. You know, one of the things we got to talk about is, you know, early in the season or early in the summer when those shad spawn, the shad spawn and hatch during the summer presents a crappie with a pretty small bait. Those shad aren't very big. But when fall arrives, the shad have grown much larger, and then as a result, crappie really prefer a larger meal. So, you know, shortly after the summertime shad spawn and hatch, those 1 and 2 inch length baits are very useful and produce a lot of fish. And they're kind of the preferred size and usually produce the best. But by fall, the angler really needs to increase that bait size to increase their strike percentages. And, you know, you may start looking at throwing a 3-inch lure to match the size of the bait fish, and that's what we're really looking at. You really need to look at the bait fish in your area, the size of what these crappie are feeding on. And, you know, we talk about match and hatch. We talked about that last week. But that really becomes much more important as that fall transition begins and gets underway. One of the other things that I cannot overemphasize is pay attention to the wind. In the fall, remember that the wind can be very important because it focuses the microscopic phytoplankton and the zooplankton that these shad feed on. And as a result, the crappie are going to be focused more on those areas where there's a higher percentage in population of shad and bait fish in that smaller area. So look for those wind-blown areas, and I guarantee you that's going to produce a little higher percentage for your efforts. The next thing we'll talk about is, you know, really going shallow when those lakes turn over. You know, we're getting ready to get in that situation where many of our freshwater lakes, especially on our highland reservoirs and, you know, down in my neck of the woods around Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Texas, down in these areas, these lakes turn over every fall. And as a result, boy, if you're on a deep pattern, the fall can, when that lake turns over, can really knock those fish in the head. So, the fall turnover can really have a negative effect on crappie. However, the seasoned crappie anglers know that the fish will still bite. One of the key ways of catching those fish is to fish shallow. And that's usually where your more active fish are going to be, is they're going to be shallow. So instead of fishing that deep pattern that you may have been fishing a week or two ago, once that lake turns over, you may need to go to that shallow pattern in order to catch those more aggressive fish and the more active fish. Because boy, I tell you, that dissolved oxygen content when that lake does turn over can really be in a lot of different places. And after that 7 to 10 day period after the lake turns over, you may find active crappie may suspend all over the place. So, when that lake does turn over, concentrate more toward the active crappie. They may be suspended higher in the water column near standing timber or boat docks during that turnover. And, that turnover period that these fish transition to can be, a week to 10 days. So just be thoughtful of that as well. I think one of the main things we covered last week, and I'll continue to really emphasize this week, is you have to be versatile, folks. You're going to go through a lot of different weather patterns in the fall. You're going to go through a lake turnover. You're going to experience many different patterns and many different techniques that you're going to have to utilize in order to stay up on these crappie. After a lake turns over, the dissolved oxygen content becomes nearly the same in many depths, and crappie may be found shallow, deep, or mid depths. Many times a shallow crappie may be the most aggressive, as we talked about a while ago, but when this is happening, I would really recommend starting to fish shallow around cover like brush and docks. And if this pattern doesn't produce, start using your Lowrance electronics to locate deeper schools of fish. Change your presentations during the day. You may get into a situation where early in the morning you may be producing fish shallow, and as the day progresses, your bite may diminish and you have to start looking for more aggressive fish, or you've lost your pattern altogether. You just can't get a bite. And in a situation like that, the pattern has changed, and you got to go find another one that produces fish. Just remember, folks, that pattern may change several times during the day. So don't be focused on one pattern. You have to be versatile. And like I said, I can't focus that enough. You may get into starting a situation early in the morning and you don't have much wind. You got a glass calm lake, and then by afternoon that wind starts picking up 5 to 10 miles an hour out of whichever direction, and that can really totally reorient them crappie to where the higher percentage areas are located. That's when you really need to start paying attention to that wind. One of the things you can do is, go lighter on your equipment. Usually in the fall, lakes are less stained. They have a clear water situation, and because we don't have as much rain normally in the late summer and early fall, so as a condition, we don't have much runoff. And that's when the lakes become usually their clearest. In spring and summer, we have heavy rainstorms that can stain the water and reduce the visibility. And you can get away with fishing, heavier line, heavier tackle as a general rule. But as the water gets clearer in the late summer and early fall, the cleaner water can make crappie very shy, line shy. So you need to reduce maybe down to 4 6 pound line visibility to increase, which has a lower visibility, which will should increase your bite ratio. So that's just one of the tips that we really need to focus on is what size line you're using. May need to change. You may need to go to fluorocarbon. You may need to use a longer leader if you're using that fluorocarbon to braid combination. There's a lot of things that going on here, folks. But as a general rule, in the fall, late summer and fall, that's when we have our cleanest water or clearest water in our reservoirs, and that's when those crappie can become line shy, especially in high sunlight conditions. If you're fishing cloudy or evening or low light conditions, that may not come into effect. But if you're fishing, one of those high bluebird, low wind days, sometimes it can make the difference between getting bite and not getting bites. One of the other topics we'll talk about, if your focus is on docks in the fall, remember the brighter the day and the higher the sun in combination to light wind conditions, the best way to reach some of these fish is to look at dock shooting. As that sun is high and a bluebird day and low wind, the further under those docks those fish will get. And in many cases, the only way to reach them is to do dock shooting, is to get that jig way up under that dock in order to present that jig to that fish, because that fish may not chase it out to the edge of the dock. So dock shooting becomes a very good presentation in order to catch those fish, present that lure. And it's one of the techniques that I would recommend anyone to learn or to practice, is shooting those docks, especially if that's one of your main focuses that you fish throughout the year or the day, is if you're fishing docks. On cloudy days, the crappie may be found just at the edge of the dock. But boy, on high bluebird days, especially low wind combination, those fish will really back up under those docks, and it can be doubly tough to even reach them. They're still there and they're still bite, but you have to present that jig in a much smaller area in order for those fish to attack it. So I recommend doing that, just practicing that dock shooting. Because it will really increase your odds of producing fish in many situations. Another tip to look for if you're really focusing on docks, and we talked a little bit about this last week, is to look for rope or string that's hanging or tied to the docks, and that will give you clues in many cases of fish producing brush that the dock owner has applied, sunk, and or added to their dock. And that may be key areas for you to focus on in order to produce some fish. If you are new to dock shooting and kind of at a loss of where to start, I've had good success using 16th ounce jig head, like on 4-pound line. I think it's a good size to start. It seems to me, or in my situation, I've noticed it seems to travel further under the docks than a lighter, say, a 32nd ounce does. Pay attention to the body that you have on it. In many cases, you do not want a real long, heavy body on it. Use the smaller bodies to skip, and I think you'll be more successful at it. An 1/8 ounce, I've just not had too much good luck with 1/8 ounce skipping. And that could be because I fish a smaller line. I don't know. I don't crappie fish much with 8 and 10-pound line. Most of my crappie fishing is done with 4 and 6, just depending on whether I'm using the cast and drag technique, vertical jigging, how deep I'm jigging. It just varies, but I very seldom go above 6-pound line. But that may be more of my personal presentations that I like, as opposed to what may work best for somebody else when they're trying to learn to dock shoot. It's really a good technique. It can be very, very beneficial, especially if you're focusing on docks in your neck of the woods that you're fishing. In some cases, when you're getting into low wind, high bluebird days, one of the things you need to be looking at that can be very beneficial is the vertical jigging on offshore structure. The constant passing of fall cold fronts can have a very negative effect on crappie feeding habits. When these cold fronts pass, a change in presentations may be required. One of these presentation changes will be to force you to slow down in order to catch these sluggish fish. And folks, when I say slow down, that needs to be with a capital SLOW. I mean, you just about can't fish slow enough when you're fishing just after a major cold front, when you got high bluebird days, very low winds. Boy, those fish can be so negative. And you have to fish slow for them. And many times vertical jigging is the only way you can get these fish to bite. Many times right after a cold front, they won't chase the lures. So the cast and drag technique can just really almost be dead in the water. You have to get above these fish. You have to be able to vertical jig for them. You have to put it right in front of their nose, and then their strike area may be very, very small. And I've seen this. I'm fortunate to be able to run the active target sonar on my Ranger, and I have seen this time and time again, to where you present that jig in front of that fish, and if that jig is a foot away from that fish won't attack that jig. But you put that 3 or 4 inches in front of that fish, and that fish will bite it. So sometimes after these major cold fronts, that's how critical that placement of that vertical jigging can be. So you may want to look at that when you're having difficulty catching fish on those high bluebird, low wind days. You got to slow down. Those crappie will move very tight to cover under those bluebird high pressure days, and that may be the only way that you can get those fish to bite and get access to them, is to fish vertically. So keep that in mind when you're fishing after these cold front high bluebird days, because it can really be tough. Another key factor when you're fishing these conditions, or in some case other conditions that where the crappie are even more aggressive, is you need to consider your color. Crappie are one of the most color sensitive species of fish that I've ever fished for. I mean, they can make you pull your hair out. You can locate them. You can locate sometimes several schools, and you just can't get them to bite. And you just can't get them fired up until you make that one color change, or in some cases make a size change. Going from maybe a 1 and 1.5 inch bait to a 2.5 inch bait can fire those fish up. Sometimes going from a very visible color to a very neutral color can fire those fish up, and vice versa. But do not get locked into a specific size or a specific color. I've seen situations to where you could throw many different color plastics at these fish and nothing seemed to fire them up. But you throw a marabou jig in there, a hair jig in there, and you fire that school up and start catching those fish. So sometimes just a slight change in presentation or lure type or lure color can make all the difference in the world. Just do not get focused in on one color, one bait. You've got to be versatile. Versatile is the name of the game here, folks. I can't emphasize that enough as well. Versatility is the name of the game. You have to be prepared to do many different things in order to find some of the situations or some of the some of the lure colors, some of the lure sizes, some of the bait changes, some of the depth changes to fire these fish up sometimes. Another way, many times, or this time of year, is our water is the clearest. One of the things that these fish can be is a little spooky, especially if they're less than 10 foot of water. It's very, very hard to vertical jig for these fish. Not impossible, but very difficult. And, if the water's too clear to get close enough to vertically present your bait without spooking the fish, one of the recommendations I would suggest is to add a slip bobber. Learn how to rig and use a slip bobber rig to your line. And, you can fish a slip bobber rig many different depths. It's infinitely adjustable. And in many times you can use that slip bobber rig to vertical fish for these fish without getting real close to these brush piles or laydowns or docks or whatever you're fishing. So, use that slip bobber rig, learn how to use them, fish them, especially if you're fishing clear water. And I think it'll increase your catch ratio a pretty good percentage points. You can throw that slip bobber rig, cast it a fairly good distance, so you can stay away from the fish and still fish a specific area and fish it vertically. In some cases, that's what it needs to trigger a fish, and you'll get the added attraction of using a slip bobber rig. If you've got any wind at all or a little pattern on the water, you can throw that slip bobber rig over there, and the wave action will make that bobber kind of go up and down, and as a result, it'll move that jig. And sometimes that's a very, very effective technique. So that's another great tool to put in your tackle box in your arsenal, is to learn how to use a slip bobber rig and to have some of those available. One of the tips I'd recommend if you're going to use a slip bobber rig is go to a 6.5, 7.5 foot rod, and that may help you somewhat in presenting that slip bobber rig and casting that slip bobber rig as opposed to a much shorter rod. So you might think about that as well. One of the other techniques we'll touch on that I don't think we touched on very much last week is spider rigging. Boy, spider rigging can be a very, very effective tool for catching these roaming schools of crappie, because that's one of the things they really do in the fall. As these shad schools roam, i.e. so do the crappie. And, the wind change, the wind direction, area of a lake you're fishing, many things can make these crappie roam. And, their whole intent is to eat. So they're going to go wherever the buffet goes. And by spider rigging, it can be easier to locate these roaming schools and to catch fish. Really, many times what you're trying to do is you're trying to follow the schools of bait fish. And if you can locate and follow these schools of bait fish, that's where your forward-facing sonar comes in. That's also where your side scan, your Lowrance active target and Lowrance side scan comes in, is being able to follow those schools of bait. And those fish will usually hang just under them or around them and follow them. Their whole purpose in life right now, the crappie, is feed. They're literally going to be gorging themselves on shad every chance they get. They're trying to put as much body mass as possible on before the water temperatures fall too greatly. And, that body mass, as I talked about earlier, is the one thing that'll get them through the winter. But, they're going to follow those schools of shad and follow, certain areas. The wind can play an important role in that as well. Whether they're turning loose water from the dam or not can also play an important role in that. But spider rigging can, you can cover a wide swath of water by rigging multiple rods with, double jigs or multiple minnow rigs on a single rod. And, those spider rigs can have a tendency to be tailor-made for that. They can really, really cover a lot of water and really sometimes produce quite a few fish for you when you're trying to locate those roaming schools. And that's really an awesome tip. But don't think that you have to have 10 rods out in front of the boat to do your spider rigging. Sometimes, just 2 or 3 will get you through what you need to do. But it is one of the techniques that you really need to pay attention to your electronics. You really need to focus on how deep you're fishing, where you're catching your fish when you start producing fish. And many times that will really pay you dividends big time. And that pretty much gets us through water temperatures in the 70s and down into the 60s. When that water temperature continues to decline, crappie really start migrating from shallow towards the deep winter holding areas in the lake, and they follow rivers and creek channels. We're starting to get into the 50s water temp, and further down, and that's where a great Lowrance locator combined with a really good C-map card like the Reveal card will show you high percentage areas where to find crappie throughout the various stages of the fish's fall migration. Key locations to look for are, as the migration path include secondary points, channel bends, small pockets along or close to major river channels, and shallow flats along or close to major river bends or major river areas. These areas can really, really produce fish when those fish start looking and start locating in these winter areas. And these winter areas that these fish hold in can be very predictable. Unless you have major changes in water depth, water current, these fish can really, really be very predictable. And you can locate them and catch them time and time again. And many times the schools, when these fish get into their winter haunts, many times when you locate a school of fish, you'll have a pretty good sized school there. So it does pay dividends to get out there and do some searching with your Lowrance maps and your Lowrance electronics to locate these schools of fish, because, like I said, they can be very, very, very predictable. And that'll just about wind it up for this week's show. We hope we gave you some more tips and some more techniques to produce these fall crappie for you. And remember, folks, two words: you got to be versatile. Okay, you got to be versatile. I can't emphasize that enough. And you got to use a wide assortment of techniques and presentations. You've got to be versatile. Use different patterns, different techniques during the fall transition. The wide diversity of weather patterns and water conditions will challenge you and your ability, but the wise angler will produce crappie. You just have to be the versatile angler. I should have said the versatile angler will produce crappie. I hope some of these tips help you guys out in this winter and fall. This is Dale York, host of Just Fish Outdoors, saying we'll catch you later.